Oh, this is great. Thank you so much. Elephant Six is great. Uh,
Thank you.
I really, well, I'm also a '90s kid, so it sort of took me back a little bit.
Yeah,
um,
same here.
yeah, honestly, Rob, but I will say I did not know who the Elephant Six were. And from what I understand of the film, that's not an uncommon thing, but unless you're one of the bands, in which case everybody sort of knows who the Elephant Six bands are.
Yeah, I think I was a huge fan of these bands at the time. I had, like some people in the film talk about, I would go into record stores and look for CDs that
Mm.
had the logo on the back. But I really didn't know who any of them were. It wasn't like some of these other bands where you knew the band members' names or there was something about what they looked like. For whatever reason, with Elephant Six, it was never about that. At
Mm.
least for me, I knew the names of maybe like Jeff Mangum from Neutral Milk Hotel, maybe Robert Schneider from the Apples in Stereo, but I guess maybe because they had this very like collagey 60s psychedelic aesthetic, it wasn't somehow their own personalities were not at the forefront. And making this film and watching this film, it's been really fun to kind of fall in love not just with the music but with these people and these characters
Mm.
who were so quirky and these charming, ahead of their time artists.
They seem to have been. They seem to have been, and I'm wondering, like, for you, as as you delved into the filmmaking, what do you see as the influence of the Elephant Six bands?
It's hard to pinpoint because it's not like you can say here's this one band that
Right.
sounds just like that, but I think part of the reason that is the case is because the Elephant Six sound was so varied and was itself kind of like rooted in this like you know semi homage to like later Beatles and Beach Boys Smile and stuff like that. They're kind of part of this trajectory of like psychedelic revivalism to an extent, while at the same time they were, as they say in the film, influenced by more contemporary '90s stuff like Pavement. I think you could name bands that sound like Pavement, but you can't name that many bands that sound like the Apples in Stereo, or certainly not Neutral Milk Hotel. Even if you can pinpoint, like there's a Phoebe Bridgers has a very poppy song with a trumpet part, Kyoto, that she played on Saturday Night Live that really kind of sounds like Neutral Milk Hotel to my ears. So you catch little bits and pieces of it, I think, their influence. But I think their greatest influence was just the DIY spirit that people carry on, maybe not stylistically, but in just, contemporary independent music that people record at home on their laptops and release on Bandcamp and SoundCloud and these kind of like alternative distribution platforms. I think you know, in a way that kind of like indie music mentality and aesthetic is more alive than it's ever been. Um, in large part thanks to them, even if you can't say, well, this band sounds like Olivia Tremor Control. I think their spirit of just like going their own way
Mm.
and making their music, even if there's not a real label or anyone financing it or anything like that, that carries on. And then of course, Neutral Milk Hotel um, are kind of like a perfect example of how some of this very independent late '90s music is just wildly popular now
Mm.
and massively well known. Even if they're not a household name, they could sell out the Hollywood Bowl.
Mm. Wow.
um, and there's a lot, indie music is huge now. It's become kind of corporatized, and you have these bands like Arcade Fire playing at arenas and stuff.
It's true.
That's You kind of see how that style of music has endured.
Yeah, it's interesting because a lot of people will look at Arcade Fire for the first time. And if they're unfamiliar with music history, and they'll say, "Wow, that's really unique." But you can see progressions along the way of what builds to the some of these current bands. One of the phrases I thought in the film was so interesting is a beacon for weirdos. I love that. I was just wondering what that means to you, and what you see as the value in that.
I mean, I think Elephant Six was inclusive before that was a word that was even
Mm.
used, you know? It was all about being yourself and being like whatever gender or color or sexuality or whatever like aesthetic taste you have or whatever personality quirk or, you know, so what might be seen as a defect or something, you embrace it and you just be an individual. Kind of like let your freak flag fly, I suppose, was a big part of it. And I think that is kind of like it's a little bit of a, you know, small college town mentality, you
Mm.
know, that exists and has existed in other scenes too, but it was really something that they embraced and they built on kind of an existing um, tradition of that within Athens, Georgia. I think they kind of like came in as outsiders to join this existing post REM Athens scene and kind of bring that town back to life. But I think they took elements of a lot of that 80s college rock and kind of added the 60s element to it and made this thing that has you know, stood the test of time.
I love that you talk about Athens, because I think growing up in the '90s, we talked about Seattle and we talked about was it New Jersey or New York? You know, like that is the East Coast, West Coast, right?
Yeah.
And I'm like, the Athens sound. Like,
Yeah.
um, but it seems like, I mean, you have these band members and they're talking about, well, I'd go to 5 or 6 shows a week, and there was just creativity was just all over the place. It was just bursting at the seams in Athens. And yet there was also this very heavy community lifestyle. It seemed to be amongst the groups. Now I know they split off and they went different areas, but I was wondering from your perspective, you know, how that community lifestyle helped shape the film or the music.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think a key part of all this is the kind of like going your own way and doing things
Mm.
yourself. Um, that kind of community aspect of it like allowed everyone to kind of help each other and support each other. And you'd have somebody like a Jeff Mangum, who's the lead vocalist in Neutral Milk Hotel, you know, playing drums on his friend's album, or the woman who joins Elf Power not knowing how to play any instruments ends up being the live sound person for Neutral Milk Hotel. You know, it's like if everybody's living in one big house together, people end up taking turns cooking dinner or doing the dishes or something. They're all supporting each other in different ways. In the same way with the music, you know, um, people can contribute things to their friend's project, and as I think Jeff Mangum in the film says, it's like the thing that makes the music special is the smaller contributions of your friends that sort of like help add to this like majestic whole of the music.
Yeah, I think there's a line in the film that talks about everyone is special in the band, and it's. I mean, it's such a different way than traditionally what you think of when you think of a band or bands, a collection of bands. This is very much a collective of
Yeah, and I
people
think
who are willing.
that may be why the individual names of the band members, for whatever reason, back when we were fans of these bands in the 90s, they weren't emphasized as much because these bands really were kind of they were teams, you know. It wasn't like, oh, well, that guy's just the drummer. It was everybody is essential to the sound and everybody is contributing something creatively. So it's such a great thing, you know. That's I think the film is a celebration of friendship and artistic collaboration and doing things together. Um, Not just like doing something just for yourself, you know. It's about
Yeah,
caring about your friends and respecting them and including them.
yeah, I love that. It's really something to see. It's something really fascinating to watch. There's a comment in the film I thought was pretty interesting. I wanted to ask you about it. Somebody says that they go further into themselves because they had to in that space. Again, I guess that's talking about in Athens. Um, and I was just wondering what that means. What was driving this creative spirit not amongst themselves? We know there's a community. Not talking about the community of band members, but the sort of atmosphere that they were in.
Yeah, I think there's something expressed in the film about sort of when you live in a small town as opposed to like, New York, um, it's a lot easier to you can I think if you're interested in alternative culture,
Mm,
if you're in a big city, it's a lot easier to just kind of go along with the group, and sort of participate in like something that is alternative, but with lots of other people, and you end up kind of just sort of following the group. Whereas I think in a small town, when there's only a handful of people who are interested in the kinds of things that you're in, um, you can kind of develop your own aesthetic even more because there's not as many people
mm.
influencing what you think is good, especially back then pre-internet, where it was you kind of had to discover you work to discover things, and you couldn't just decide, well, I'm into this one hyper specific type of art or music that I found about online.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And actually, it's funny. I mean, again, having grown up in the '90s, a lot of times people compared them to the '60s in terms of the artistic vibe. Um, Technology was just changing enough to sort of give you these new opportunities, new sounds, and explore these things. It really is a and as I'm watching the film, I can see that ethos sort of playing out. The sounds that they're creating are almost just a state of play. Like, let's try this. I think at one point somebody makes a comment about how they wanted to bounce a basketball on the ground, and their teacher said, "No, you can't do that." So he did it anyway, or something like that.
Yeah, for
Uh,
sure. There's a spirit of experimentation and um, a spirit of just chance.
yeah.
The heavy influence of like William S. Burroughs and the sort of cut up writing techniques of just let's throw a bunch of words into a hat and see what comes out. You see that even in the band names like Neutral Milk Hotel and Olivia Tremor Control are basically like if they're cut up. It's like refrigerator magnet poetry names. um so you see a lot of that, and yeah, and yet it was a very, even though it was influenced by all those 60s artistic movements, it was super 90s at the same time. It's like they were almost taking the sort of like lo-fi home recording aesthetic of like Sebado and Guided by Voices and adding this like more LSD influence to it.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I would say this to you too. I know we're starting to run out of time, but do you think that we've lost that sort of creative spirit today, or has it just changed into other forms?
No, I don't think so. I think there's almost more interesting music now. It's just that there's just so much stuff out there that it's so hard to keep
Mm,
track of anything, and God knows how many things are falling through the cracks of like going online and disappearing and no one ever hears it. I'm sure there's great stuff that we're missing that maybe in the future somebody will shine a light on, but it's the same issue you have with overproduction of like films and TV shows right now, where it's just like there's so much good stuff, you know, something small can so easily be forgotten. Whereas I think, in the 90s and before the internet, there were a lot more barriers to entry,
mm.
you had to have more specialized knowledge to be able to get a cassette out there or go on tour. And now it's like anybody can make their thing at home and upload it, and nobody's making any money off of it. and there's probably bands like the Apples in Stereo that are just as good now that they don't have that CD revenue and they can't
Right.
make that second album or whatever, or maybe they can't even get anybody to notice them in the first place. So I think there's stuff out there, and there's it's more of a economic maybe reality than dearth of creativity.
Right. That's fair. Well, the film is great. I was just wondering, as we wrap up, what you hope audiences take away from it.
I hope that one, that people fall in love with this music for the first time, or again, if it's something that meant something to them in the past. We tried to make a film that would be totally accessible to anybody, whether they had no background on these bands or whether they were a fan of Neutral Milk Hotel only. I think hopefully people can watch this movie and by the end of it kind of really be a fan of the group as a whole. So we hope it'll get people to listen to these bands again and maybe allow some of them to go back on tour. And then we hope it inspires people to just make their art, whatever that is. Take these bands' inspiration and go record something at home, or make a cool collage, or put on a theater show or something. It's like the film, do something creative with your friends, and don't wait for someone else to tell you it's okay to do it, because you have to do it yourself.
I love that. That's great. Honestly, I really appreciate it, Rob. The film's a blast. It is absolutely, it's almost more of a mood than it is a documentary. It's really interesting to watch. It's sort of ethereal in its approach. It's really well done, and premiering at DOC NYC.
Yep, this week.
This week.
Yeah.
Well, congratulations on it. I wish you the best, and
thank you so much. Nice talking with you.
Absolutely. It's nice talking with you too. Thanks so much.
Bye.
Bye.